million years old as opposed to a few thousand. Atheists are free to imagine this possibility. They're also free to admit that if such brilliant extraterrestrials exist, the Bible and the Quran are going to be even less impressive to them than they are to human atheists. It's often imagined that atheists are in principle closed to spiritual experience. But the truth is that there's nothing that prevents an atheist from experiencing self-transcending love, or ecstasy, or rapture, or awe. In fact, there's nothing that prevents an atheist from going into a cave for a year or a decade and practicing meditation like a proper mystic. What atheists don't tend to do is make unjustified and unjustifiable claims about the cosmos on the basis of those experiences. Now, but there's no question that disciplines like meditation and prayer can have a profound effect upon the human mind. But do the positive experiences of, say, Christian mystics over the ages suggest that Jesus is the sole savior of humanity? Not even remotely, because Christians have been having these experiences, but so have Buddhists and Muslims and even atheists. So there's a deeper reality here, and it makes a mockery of religious denominations. The fact is that whenever human beings make an honest effort to get at the truth, they reliably transcend the accidents of their birth and upbringing. I mean, just as it would be absurd to speak about Christian physics, though the Christians invented physics, and it would be absurd to speak about Muslim algebra, though the Muslims invented algebra. It will one day be absurd to speak about Christian or Muslim ethics or spirituality. And whatever is true about our circumstance in ethical and spiritual terms is discoverable now and can be articulated without offending all that we've come to understand about the nature of the universe. And certainly without making divisive claims about the unique sanctity of any book or pegging these most beautiful features of our lives to rumors of ancient miracles. Finally, there's this notion that atheism is responsible for the greatest crimes in the 20th century. Now, this is actually, it's quite amazing to me. This is the most frequent objection I come across, so I think I should deal with it briefly. It is amazing how many people think that the crimes of Hitler and Pol Pot and Mao were the result of atheism. The truth is, this is a total misconstrual of what went on in those societies and of the psychological and social forces that allow people to follow their dear leader over the brink. I mean, the problem with fascism and communism was not that they were too critical of religion. The problem is they're too much like religions. I mean, these are utterly dogmatic systems of thought. I mean, I recently had a debate with Rick Warren in the pages of Newsweek, and he suggested that North Korea was a model atheist society and that any atheist with the courage of his convictions should want to move there. The truth is, North Korea is organized exactly like a faith-based cult, centered on the worship of Kim Jong-il. The North Koreans apparently believe that the shipments of food aid that they receive from us to keep them from starving to death are actually devotional offerings to Kim Jong-il. Is too little faith really the problem with North Korea? Is too much skeptical inquiry what is wrong here? Yes, Auschwitz, the Gulag, and the killing fields are not the product of atheism. They're the product of other dogmas run amok. Nationalism, political dogma. Hitler did not engineer a genocide in Europe because of atheism. In fact, Hitler doesn't even appear to have been an atheist. He regularly invoked Jesus in his speeches. But that's beside the point. He did it on the basis of other beliefs, dogmas about Jews and the purity of German blood. The history of Muslim jihad, however, does have something to do with Islam. The atrocities of September 11th did have something to do with what 19 men believed about martyrdom and paradise. The fact that we're not funding stem cell research at the federal level does have something to do with what Christians believe about conception and the human soul. It's important to focus on the specific consequences of specific ideas. So I want to make it very clear that I am not holding religion responsible for every bad thing that a religious person has done in human history, to be balanced against all the bad things that atheists have done. I'm only holding religion responsible for what people do and will continue to do explicitly for religious reasons. So I submit to you that there really is no society in human history that has ever suffered because its population became too reasonable, too reluctant to embrace dogma, or too demanding of evidence. So in conclusion, let me say that I think civilization in the 21st century is passing through a bottleneck of sorts, formed on the one side by 21st century destructive technology, and on the other by Iron Age superstition. And we will either pass through this bottleneck, more or less intact, more or less painfully, or we'll destroy ourselves. Now, perhaps this fear sounds grandiose to some of you, but the truth is that civilizations can end. In fact, every civilization in human history virtually has ended. Over and over again in history, some unlucky generation has had to witness the ruination of everything they and their ancestors had worked hard to build. We are part of history. There is no guarantee that things can't go spectacularly wrong for us. In fact, it's an article of faith in many religious communities that things will go spectacularly wrong, and that this is a good thing. 79% of Americans think that Jesus is going to come down out of the clouds and rectify all of our problems with his magic powers at some point in history. 20% of Americans claim to be certain that it will happen in their lifetime. This is precisely the sort of thinking we do not need. And I think it should be rather obvious that prophecies about the end of the world could well be self-fulfilling. So in the uniqueness of our circumstance with respect to the growth of technology, I think also shouldn't be ignored. I mean, not only is technology growing, but the rate at which technology is growing is also growing. I mean, futurists like Ray Kurzweil have said that the rate is doubling every 10 years. So that if you look at the rate at which technology was growing in the year 2000 as your metric, the 20th century represents something like 20 years of change. Now we're in the process of making another 20 years of change in about 14 years, and then 7, and then 3.5. If this trend continues, the 21st century won't represent 100 years of technological change, but 20,000 years. I mean, 20,000 years ago, human beings exactly like ourselves, with the same size brains, the same biological capacity for creative thought, had been languishing for at least 100,000 years and had produced nothing more complicated than a bow and arrow. We went from a bow and arrow to the internet in 20,000 years. Imagine seeing this much change in a single century. And let's be utterly conservative. Let's just say we're going to have as much change in this century as we did last century. Even this is sobering when you recognize who is going to have access to this kind of technology. I mean, just look at how the internet has facilitated the global jihadist movement among Muslims. Look how difficult it is proving to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So I think if we accept the I think, quite reasonable premise that it's going to remain easier to break things than to fix them or defend them, the growth of technology is quite sobering in the way that it is interacting with religion, especially in a world that has been shattered into competing religious and moral communities, and especially among communities who think death is an illusion, that this world is fit only to be consumed by God's fury, and that the destruction of every tangible good will itself be the highest good because it will be a gateway to eternity. These are explicitly religious ideas. They have no basis in fact, and yet they are amazingly well subscribed. It seems to me that it is everyone's responsibility to help break this spell. Thank you very much.
Oh, hello. In your arguments, you use mostly reason and the brain to argue against religion and the Bible. The ancient philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in his Pensées, "The heart has reason in which reason does not know. We know this in countless ways." What would you say to people who try to lead a good and just life by through their religion and by following what is in their hearts, rather than following the literal sayings of the Bible and following reasoning?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't mean to diminish experience that has nothing to do with coming to a rational understanding of the way the world works. I mean, much of our experience is not a matter of reason. It's not a matter of belief even, and some of the most important aspects of our experience aren't. So experiencing love and devotion and awe, I mean, these are features of our subjectivity that I think are extraordinarily valuable. The important thing to recognize is that if you think the only real container, the only viable container for those experiences is your denominational church, is the language of your ancestors, you know, if you're still committed to being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, I think you are tacitly supporting the religious divisions in our world. I mean, you are giving cover, I think, quite explicitly to all of the people who take their holy books far more seriously. I mean, I can't tell you how much time I and other people have spent having to fight the battle against the liberals and moderate Christians and Jews and Muslims who will insist upon the viability of these denominations and of raising their children to think that they're Christians and Muslims and Jews, and who will never admit that any of the extremist behavior going on in the name of their faith has anything to do with religion. And so there's no question in my mind that it provides a kind of friction in our discourse where we really can't call a spade and say, okay, this is much of the Bible and the Quran is just life-destroying gibberish, and we just have to acknowledge this and cease to take these books seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. First of all, I loved your first book. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I'm stunned at how young you are, because...
Don't be stunned, I'm not that young.
Yeah. Well, in learning, I mean, I thank you so much for taking the time to study Western and Eastern religions for decades. That's why I thought you were older. And I haven't read the second book yet, I apologize. But my question has to do more with where our beliefs come from. We know there's a lot of peer pressure in our culture to be religious, to have a belief in God, and to be a part of some organized religion. And I have tried my whole life to be a part of that in terms of, I've tried 3 different religions. I've converted twice. And that thing doesn't work for me. The God thing does not work for me. And I've always felt very unhappy about it, that it was a lack somehow in my character. But then I've read recently that there's a study that has been done, and I'm wondering if maybe this is why you're studying neuroscience. There's a study that has been done that posits there may be a belief gene. There